Enron was once a dominating presence in the business world. However, everyone knows about this huge disaster, but do you really know the specifics? Let's dive into the thick of it and take a look at the story of one of the biggest cases of financial fraud of all time. Nowadays, when you hear the name Enron, you immediately associate it with failure and corruption, but back in the day, it was considered to be anything but that. I mean, just look at this old school Enron commercial. In a world where Wall Street was confusing, outdated, and corrupt, Enron sold itself as modern, trustworthy, and streamlined, and people ate it up. Well, until it became clear that the main thing that they were really innovating was that old school Wall Street corruption. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. How did all of this mess begin? Well, like a true corporate love story, it began with a merger. The whole company began when American businessman Kenneth Lay merged regional companies then known as Houston Natural Gas and Internorth. Now that's not exactly romantic, so just picture Houston Natural Gas running through an airport to unite with Internorth like a proper rom-com. In 1985, Lay brought this couple together in one giant corporation that oversaw electricity, natural gas, communications, and pulp and paper. The company's vision was to eventually become the biggest natural gas pipeline in America. After a rocky start, the company started looking into other areas of success. It branched out into international markets. It launched a service called Gas Bank, which made it easier for wholesale buyers to purchase gas supplies. And it kept a lot of its failures a closely guarded secret. Then it shifted strategies again in the 90s until it was perceived as more of an investment firm or a hedge fund. The business rapidly changed throughout the 90s as this new thing called the internet was really taking off. Enron was seen as a cutting-edge company that jumped on new technology and new opportunities with gusto. The entire venture was a massive success. It employed tens of thousands of people and brought in billions of dollars in revenue. This was through the 80s and 90s too, before billionaires became contentious figures for many. No one would make fun of CEOs like those in charge of Enron, like they do with Elon Musk pretty much 24/7 on his own social media company. No, everyone wanted to be a CEO of a new innovative company. Enron was like a rock star company. It was regularly featured in articles about the very best companies in the United States. Fortune even named Enron America's most innovative company, and not once, but 6 times. It was considered one of the best companies to work for, too, and it was lauded as a safe place for employees to create a future. Once 2001 rolled around, it was all too late. Nothing but doom ahead. Before we get to Enron's doom, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more corporate scandal drama. In order to properly understand the Enron scandal, you need to know more about the major players. Let's start with a name you absolutely should know, Jeffrey Skilling. You know how the Marvel Cinematic Universe was chugging along just fine with heroes beating up manageable bad guys until Thanos showed up and absolutely decimated them? Well, you can look at Jeffrey Skilling as the Thanos of Enron crisis. Instead of collecting Infinity Stones, though, he collected senior management positions at the company. After working as a consultant for the company in the late 80s, he impressed Kenneth Lay so much that Lay decided to hire him and then keep giving him more positions. And finally, he snagged the big stone, the big job, the CEO of all of Enron in 1997, second only to Lay himself. Thanos' evil plan was to wipe out half the universe. Skilling's was a bit more complicated, something called mark-to-market accounting. This philosophy was that Enron could essentially value its own assets based on predictions of future prices instead of past prices. If that sounds confusing and like total BS, then you have figured it out a lot faster than anyone did in the 90s. The next player we've got to introduce is Arthur Andersen. If Skilling was Thanos, then Artie Anderson was one of those guys always worshipping Thanos until they meet their grisly, awful end. Only Arthur Andersen is not like some sad accountant who just got something pulled over on him, but one of the 5 biggest accounting firms in the United States. So why don't you recognize that name? Well, that's because they don't exist anymore, and don't worry, we will get there. Finally, we have Sharon Watkins, who was basically the Iron Man of the Enron story. She was the vice president of corporate development at the Enron Corporation. She heavily investigated the accounting irregularities and the shady financial dealings going on at the company. To her credit, she tried to warn Kenneth Lay about it. She wrote a famous memo stating that, quote, "I am incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals," end quote. This was about as helpful as warning someone about an incoming train when it's bearing down on you already. Finally, we've got the rest of our heroes. There's Bethany McLean and Peter Elkind, reporters who were closely following Enron's ridiculously overpriced stock. Then there's Jim Chanos, the short seller who got ahead of the curve to short Enron before its downfall. So by now, you probably understand what you need to about Enron's shady business practices. You really don't need to understand the specifics. What you need to understand is the confusion. No one knew exactly how Enron made the revenue it was reporting, and shareholders were starting to get a little too curious. Famously, Skilling was once asked, quote, "You know, you are the only financial institution that can't produce a balance sheet or cash flow statement with their earnings," end quote. To which Skilling retorted, quote, "Thank you very much. We appreciate that, a-hole." This became an inside joke within the company, with people jokingly asking, "Ask why, a-hole?" As you might expect, this did not quell any fears. It was about this time in 2001 that our Iron Man, Sharon Watkins, sent a memo to her friend at Arthur Andersen detailing some of the issues she was seeing. In the ultimate foretelling of things to come, Jeff Skilling suddenly left the company citing personal reasons, though he ended up trying to sell off 500,000 Enron shares, close to 15.5 million, hoping no one would notice because it was so close to September the 11th. People noticed. Eventually, all of this came to light. Enron famously went bankrupt at the end of 2001 due to the shocking reveal, which eventually shocked no one by that point. Enron's reported earnings were held together with creative accounting fraud. So how did everything end up? Well, for our heroes, things went pretty well. Iron Man Sharon Watkins testified against Enron and was seen as a whistle-blowing hero. Even though it cost her her professional career, she was selected as one of 3 people of the year for Time magazine. The other 2 also dealt with similar scandals to Enron. She also has frequent speaking engagements and wrote a successful book titled Power Failure: The Inside Story of the Collapse of Enron. Our reporters, Bethany McLean and Peter Elkind, wrote the Enron book known as Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, which was then adopted into a documentary that also featured interviews with Sharon Watkins. Jim Chanos made a $500 million profit shorting Enron, though he's seen some rough years dwindle his fortunes considerably. As for the villains, well, Arthur Andersen went out of business within a year, ending a nearly 90-year run, and this led to something called the Andersen effect, where auditors perform extra due diligence to avoid making the same mistakes. Kenneth Lay was found guilty of 6 counts of conspiracy and fraud among several other crimes, but passed away from a heart attack before he could be sentenced. And then we've got our Thanos, Jeffrey Skilling, who went to trial and was sentenced to 24 years in federal prison, of which he served 14 and a $45 million fine. He tried to get back into the online oil and gas trading game through the platform he named Veld LLC, but it folded in under a year. Yeah, he definitely faded into dust, Thanos style. Actually, so did Enron, which officially folded for good in 2006. Funnily enough, Enron did make good on its vow to change the business world for the better by getting rid of the old school corruption practices committed on Wall Street. Only they did it through failure instead of success. The scandal led the way for more legislation which increased the accuracy of financial reporting for publicly traded companies. Most importantly, 2002 saw the imposition of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which added harsher penalties for corruption involving financial records. So when it comes to corporate transparency, no one's gonna say, "Ask why, a-hole," anymore. Not unless they want to pay a massive fine. The very same people who took down Enron and Skilling seem to think that Tesla and Elon Musk may be next. Just something to look out for.